Order. Lee Anderson to move the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Today, I want to talk about the story of two men. One of the men, Terance Radford, was born on the 11th of August 1931, and he died on the 19th of April 2019, aged 87. Now, Terance was an upstanding citizen, a gentleman that made an outstanding contribution to his country, well loved and well respected throughout the community. The other man we're going to talk about is a gentleman called Gavin Collins. He was a thief, and that's the best way I can explain it. I want to talk briefly about Terance Radford, or Terry, as his family called him, and what kind of man he was, because I think it's important that it's not just a name, it's a person that we're talking about here today, and his lovely family are in the public gallery on his behalf. Terry was an amazing dad and granddad, and all his family loved and respected him, and they were, and still are, in awe of everything that he achieved in his life. He was born in Mansfield Woodhouse, which is the next constituency. The MP there, by the way, is Ben Bradley, who was very supportive of this case. He lived there all his life. Sorry, the Honourable Member from Mansfield. I do apologise, Chair. He was born in Mansfield Woodhouse, lived there all his life, and he was proud of his village, and he cared deeply about his community. He went to the national school and had a very traditional upbringing, did Terry. His dad was a miner, and his mum was a housewife, who created a loving home for Terry and his three sisters. He excelled in his studies, and when he left school, he went to work for the Metal Box in Mansfield, a major local employer, a place actually where my mother worked and many of my friends. And to further his education, he went to a local college to study engineering at night school. And he excelled at that, and then went to do his national service, where he served in the Royal Navy as a petty officer, working on minesweepers, an incredibly brave and dedicated man. When he'd done his service, he went to work for Rolls-Royce in the aero design team, and very proudly, he worked on the RB211 fan blades. His job regularly took him to the United States for several weeks at a time to work for their sister company. And Terry would always enjoy coming back and sharing his knowledge with the younger people. And then when he was in his 50s, he decided to become a teacher. And he worked at the Valley Comprehensive School in Worksop, teaching woodwork and metalwork until he retired. And despite always having a demanding job, it wasn't enough for Terry. He always tried to serve his community the best way he could. He was a local councillor for many years, and he also took the post of head governor at several local schools in the Mansfield area. And he was also a Justice of the Peace, a job he enjoyed from 1971 to 1985. And everyone in the community always valued Terry for his honesty and his integrity, and he would always take time to help people. He's what we probably call a salt of the earth type of gentleman, was Terry. He loved life, he was highly intelligent, a great conversationalist, and great fun to be with, and everybody in his family loved to spend time with Terry. He was extremely fit for his age, 87 years old when he died, extremely fit. He used to go to the gym, he'd use all the apparatus there, go swimming 3 times a week. But his favourite time was spending time with his family and friends, and especially young people. He liked to spend time with his grandchildren and their friends. He was the family rock, he was the hub, he was the go-to person where family would go to if they needed advice or comfort. So that's a brief description of the type of chap that Terry was. Now I want to talk about Gavin Collins now. He, on November the 9th, 2017, he was back in court, sentenced to 5 months for an offence he committed in 2017, in May 2017. And time was spent on remand, so it meant he was released the following day. But he was rearrested for offences such as burglary, theft, and these were all committed in December 2017. Now, on the 11th of July 2018, he was sentenced to 3 years, this Gavin Collins, sentenced to 3 years for burglary and theft from a dwelling. This is actually the sentence that he was released early from at HMP Ramsey. On the 4th of April 2019, Collins' paperwork was sent to Governor Archer, who granted early release for April the 18th, 2019, and it was agreed that he would go home on a tag. At this time, Collins was actually in segregation, away from all the other prisoners, because he'd set fire to his cell twice and he'd injured a prison staff member with a plastic knife. Collins was then placed on report. On the 13th of April 2019, the police informed the prison that they decided not to pursue a criminal investigation, as it was a matter that could be dealt with by the prison directly. There's a failure there. On the 15th of April 2019, statements by Governors Archer, Cope and Fretwell had conversations on the 15th of April regarding Collins' early release date. They were looking at a release date of the 18th of April due to the upcoming bank holiday, because it was a Good Friday, which was Friday the 19th of April. Collins was due to be released anyway on the 29th of April, but after the investigation of him setting fire to the cell, that would have gone beyond that, so the very earliest he would have been released should have been the 29th of April. This had always been scheduled, by the way. On the 16th of April 2019, Collins woke up other prisoners in the night shouting that he was dying. He was medically checked over and found to be medically fit. Later that day, he was lying down in the ground in the exercise yard. He claimed to have been poisoned by methadone. The doctor was made aware of his behaviour. On the 18th of April, Collins was released early morning from HMP Ramsey. A family friend collected him and said he didn't look right. He was talking funny. His behaviour was strange. It's as though he had been on drugs. He took him home and told family members how concerned he was for Collins. This is when the trail of havoc started. On the 19th of April 2019, Collins forced his way into several people's houses, their homes, stealing 3 cars. He crashed the first 2 cars and then forced his way into a woman's home by smashing the back door. Collins then used blood from his injuries and daubed crucifixes on the heads of the woman and her children, while talking about God and making threats to kill them. He then stole her car, which he used to drive into Mr. Radford. Before he got out, and he shouted, "I've killed him. I've killed the devil." Mr. Radford had just gone out for his morning walk and was waiting near a bus stop, minding his own business. He died at the scene. Collins was later jailed for 21 years for manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. But this needn't have happened. Terry could still be here today had it not been for the failures of HMP Ramsey and the 3 governors who actually made the decision, wrong decision, to release Collins and ultimately lead to the death of Terry Radford. Now, the family are sat here today and they think it's unacceptable. I think that's putting it mildly. It's actually criminal. And they are unable to find out the outcome of the disciplinary proceedings of the prison governors concerned. Had this been a criminal court, they would probably have known by now. They attended the inquest every single day, and they found out these people's names, the people who are responsible for letting this Collins out of prison. They saw the faces of the governors and watched them as they told untruths throughout the process. But the coroner knew the truth. The coroner got to the bottom of it, and it's all now in the public domain and accessible to everyone. But they're still not allowed to know what happened to the people that let Collins out of prison. I think that's wrong, Madam Chair. As usual, the family think that the wrongdoers are protected and innocent people are left with no closure. They're doing their very best to move on, but they can't move on because they want to know what's happened to these people that were ultimately responsible for the release of Gavin Collins and then their father's and Terry's death. They think, and I agree with them, that they should have been facing a criminal court for their actions, not just disciplinary proceedings. They don't understand why no one within the justice system wanted to take this further. How could the governors get away with taking the law into their own hands by releasing a prisoner when they had no authority to do so? And why wasn't it investigated by Nottinghamshire police? The family know that the police went to HMP Ramsey on the day of the incident to retrieve records, and they had investigated thoroughly. If they had investigated thoroughly, they would have known what happened. If the coroner could work out what had happened, then why couldn't the police? Should Nottinghamshire Police have investigated this failing? I think they probably should. In the Prevention of Future Deaths report, the coroner stated, was Mr Radford's death avoidable? The answer was yes. Had Collins remained in prison, then Mr Radford may have been here today. There's many failings over the whole investigation and so many similarities, sadly, with the stabbings in Nottingham City last year. And the family feel that no lessons have been learnt. They want to know what actions have been taken against the individual persons and have any of them actually been dismissed from the prison service, downgraded or transferred. The fact that they're not allowed to know makes them feel as if there's been a cover-up. And they just wish that none of these people are actually still working within the prison service. That would be an absolute travesty. So I want to ask the Minister, if that's okay, Chair, to look at the family here. This is a family who's lost Terry. Got two of his sons there. Lost their dad, their loving father. They've come here today for justice. They want closure. So I want you to look at them in the eyes when you make your remarks and tell them what happened to these governors. Thank you, Chair.
The question is that this House has considered lessons learnt from the Terance Radford Prevention of Future Deaths report. And I call Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Dame Maria. First of all, can I thank the Honourable Member for Ashfield for setting the scene so very well and with the compassion and understanding that we expect of him and which he's delivered on many occasions. And first of all, Madam Maria, I would probably start to say our sympathies are clearly with the family who are here seeking justice and understanding of just what happened and what took place. The Honourable Member for Ashfield has outlined the case very, very well, and I just want to make a few comments. It won't take very long, Dame Maria, but I just think it's worthy of putting on record because of the implications of the case. Also to say I'm very pleased to see the Minister in his place and the Shadow Minister as well, because I think what we seek here is an understanding of what happened and how it happened and why it shouldn't happen again. And that's what I want to speak about. When I read the details of the case, I was sickened and shocked, and my thoughts immediately went to the family of that, as an honourable gentleman for Ashfield, despite the old gentleman who had holidays planned and was enjoying a full life when it was taken to him by someone who had demonstrated that they had absolutely no regard for human life. To see, Dame Maria, this early release under curfew has undoubtedly shown, and I believe sown as well, a major flaw in the process. And whilst the Minister for Justice, who is a compassionate man, who understands the issues and will try to encapsulate our questions that we all have in relation to it in his responses. It's been clear in response to the coroner's report and the recommendations, the question that has been raised by the family of this gentleman and others in this place as how this was allowed to happen in the first place. How was a man who could not be kept under control in prison expected to abide by curfew obligations once released? Honourable Gentleman for Ashfield has clearly outlined the attitude of the man in prison when he was there, what he did, his threats to staff and his destruction of property. The ordinary man says that he couldn't understand why he was ever released. And yet, because legislation or guidance did not directly say this, we have had, unfortunately, the death of this man. To me, this is an indication of how decisions are made looking at the letter and not the spirit of the law, as it should be, not about justice and compassion and understanding for family. No reasonable person could have determined that the spirit of this curfew option was for people such, and I use these words very, I don't normally do, but of this thug who had set fires and attacked prison guards in custody, and yet there is such a fear of impinging on human rights of the prisoner that it must be black and white for them, and this is only an option for those whom it is safe to do so. Dear Maria, I firmly believe that we must come away from this fear, away from, and instill in our decision makers, in the courts of the land, in the authorities who make decisions, the confidence that judgment can and should be used, and that they will be supported in this decision. And the lesson of Terance Radford is, I believe, dear Maria, a shame on society, what happened and what the outcome was. And it was a shame and disgrace that Gavin Collins could be released onto the scheme. Here today, we must ensure that this slavish adherence to the letter of a law or omission of expressly stated reasoning is never, and never can be, sound reason for releasing dangerous people onto our streets until we absolutely have no choice to do otherwise. That's why the confidence in the law of the land, confidence in the justice that we seek and support and wish for. This lesson, dear Maria, is a hard one. It's a hard one for the family. It's a hard one for the Honourable Member for Ashfield to tell a story, a personal story, in this chamber. But it's still harder for Terance's family, who grieve his loss, and the grief of a society who I believe understands how badly we have failed them and failed Terance Radford's family. Thank you.
We now move to front bench speeches, and I call Ruth Cadbury for the opposition.
Thank you, Dame Maria. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship for the first time, I think, in my case. I'd very much like to thank the Honourable Member for Ashfield for bringing this important debate today, and also for the way in which he presented it and the humanity in which he brought to his speech. And my thoughts are with Terance Radford's family and friends, and for their bravery in all of this time and for coming here today. Thank you. Dame Maria, I've read the coroner's report, the Ministry of Justice's response, and I have, perhaps most powerfully, read what Terance's family said in the aftermath of the killing. Terance, or Terry, an 87-year-old grandfather who had served this country, a retired teacher and a former magistrate, was simply waiting for a bus before he was struck and killed by a car driven by a man released from prison the day before. Today I want to focus on, as my time is limited, I'll focus on the specifics of the case, the wider issues within our prison probation and justice system, and finally, the issues that remain within the home detention curfew system and other early release schemes. Three crucial issues in this case were ignored before the release of the driver whose actions killed Terance. Firstly, he was being kept in a segregated wing after committing acts of violence, yet this wasn't considered as a factor to prevent early release. Second, an ongoing investigation into his behaviour was still outstanding. And thirdly, the probation service had not done a proper risk assessment about his release. The report by the coroner is damning. Organisations not talking to each other, risk assessments not being carried out, and gaps in the early release scheme were not being closed until it was too late. Terance was failed by the justice system and by the government. And one key purpose of prison is to keep the public safe. We need to uphold confidence and support for our justice system. And as other members have said, and I thank the member for Strangford for his always careful and considerate remarks in this debate today. Cases like this have shaken our constituents' faith in the justice system, and no more so than Terance Radford's family and friends. According to reports, the driver had assaulted prison officers, set 2 fires to the prison, and had threatened to kill an officer. And this is not an isolated case. Yes, the specific factors cited around home detention curfew may have been case-specific, but too often we've seen individuals being released from prison without proper risk assessments and without different services talking to each other. We've seen 3 serious case reviews: Damien Bendel, Jordan McSweeney, and Joshua Jacks. Individuals released after incorrect or insufficient risk assessments by staff with too little experience sometimes, and then the offender went on to commit a serious further offence. You might ask why our justice system is in this state. For 14 years, we've seen a crisis in our criminal justice system, a crisis in our courts, our prisons and our probation sector. The loss of experienced staff and a high turnover in prisons and probation, in the staffing of prisons and probation, means a crisis that means even bigger gaps are forming, gaps that create more victims. The report from the former Chief Inspector of Probation was damning. Too often, proper risk assessments are not happening. I am repeating myself, but that's no coincidence. Time and again, we see serious cases like this, where an individual's died, a report is released finding gaps, the minister comes to this place and tells us it's all broadly fine, and we are expected to wait until the next serious report to repeat this cycle. And it's on this subject that I want to probe the minister on how we prevent this happening, being quite aware that there's an outside chance that I might be in his position after the general election. The government are currently looking to expand home detention curfew in the sentencing bill. Last Monday, in an SI debate, I asked the minister when this bill would be coming back. We've since read in the Sunday Times that the Justice Secretary has been having angry phone calls with Number 10 about this. So I give the minister another chance. Could he confirm when the sentencing bill will come back to this House? And if the government still plans on expanding home detention curfew? Likewise, if it is expanded, could he let us know what specific safeguards will be in place to protect victims of crime, including victims of domestic violence? And how will the government ensure that there are adequate probation officers to carry out the required risk assessments if more people are released on home detention curfew? The MOJ estimates an additional, the MOJ impact assessment estimates an additional 850 offenders will be managed by probation as a consequence of the changes. The probation service is already overstretched. How will it cope with an additional 850? I also want to put on record my concern about the lack of transparency on the early custody release scheme, another scheme to release prisoners early, now being expanded to release more prisoners. Yet the minister says they will only publish numbers annually. And secondly, on ECSL, I've seen an example where a victim of domestic violence saw their abuser released and housed near to them. It was only after an intervention and escalation that alternative housing somewhere else was found. So can the minister let the House know what's specifically being done around protecting victims when prisoners are released early under the ECSL scheme? Dame Maria, we know that our criminal justice system is in crisis, and it's heartbreaking and wrong that people like Terance, a man in his 80s just waiting at a bus stop, end up featuring in reports and have their names echoing around this place, when these years of his life should have been spent with his family and with his loved ones. I look forward to the Minister's response.
Thank you very much, Dame Maria. And I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Ashfield, for securing a debate on this important issue. It is, as we've all seen, inevitably a sad debate given the nature of the tragic events we are discussing here today. And I'd like to firstly express my deepest sympathy to his constituents, to Mr Radford's family and friends, and to highlight, as the Shadow Minister did, the dignity that they have shown throughout what has been a horrific set of circumstances. The circumstances of Terry's death are truly terrible, and my thoughts are with them and the rest of his family. I should also like to extend my sympathies to the other victims of Mr Collins' crimes that day as well. Now, I know that the honourable gentleman has been rightly tenacious in raising this matter and pursuing this matter, and I'm conscious that he's engaged with my predecessors prior to my appointment to this role in November last year, and I have taken the time to read carefully his extensive correspondence with previous ministers in this role. The circumstances of this crime and the other serious offences committed on the 19th of April 2019 are deeply, deeply, not just troubling, but deeply upsetting. And I'm grateful to the coroner for their work in highlighting areas in the home detention curfew policy, as it was at that time, that require action, helping to ensure that we have updated, improved policies and practices in place to help prevent things like this happening again. I note the points made by the Shadow Minister in her speech, but I'm afraid I'm going to focus on the specifics of this case and what happened rather than ranging more widely into a broader political sphere. We took the findings and recommendations in the coroner's report extremely seriously, and I'll go on to explain the actions that the government has taken in response, though I do fully appreciate that this will not lessen in any way the pain and the loss to Terry's family and friends. And I acknowledge that the internal investigation into this case identified errors and failures which are also important for me to speak about and address. It may be helpful at the start for me to say a little about the home detention curfew scheme, or HDC, under which Collins was released. It's been in place for over 2 decades, being created and introduced in 1999 by the then Home Secretary Jack Straw, and is a tool in successfully managing the transition of eligible offenders from custody back into the community. It does so by enabling certain prisoners to be released before their normal automatic release date, while remaining subject to significant restrictions on their liberty, including a curfew which is monitored by electronic tag. Now, the scheme is limited to certain types of offenders. All sexual offenders, for example, and serious violent offenders are excluded from it, as are those subject to parole board release. And offenders are required to undergo a robust risk assessment to ensure they're only released if there is a plan in place to manage them safely in the community. And I'm sorry to say that, having looked into this case following the honourable gentleman's tabling of this debate, in Collins's case, that process was clearly found to have fallen short of what was expected and what people had a right to expect. While the offences for which he was serving his sentence were correctly identified as eligible and suitable for HDC, as the honourable gentleman has highlighted, the risk management planning had been undertaken without obtaining all the relevant information that would have informed that. This included information about the mental health of Mr Collins at the time, and I'll say a little more about the investigation and its findings. Protecting the public must be our overriding priority, and it's therefore right to keep HDC policy and practices under review to make sure it remains as robust and as safe as is possible. And that must, of course, mean learning lessons and taking action when something goes tragically wrong, as it did on this occasion. Every failure or serious incident committed by someone who has been released on HDC is rightly taken incredibly seriously. And it was truly appalling what happened in this case with the death of Terry. And the honourable gentleman painted, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, I'm grateful to him for painting a very human picture and making this House, those following our proceedings, very much aware that this is a real person. This was someone who served their community, served their country, and was much loved by their family and friends, and were only going about their normal daily life, which they should have been able to enjoy peacefully as normal. So I should have said I'm grateful to him for making this a very human story and bringing that through in our debate today. It is why we've taken actions to investigate what happened and address the concerns raised by the coroner, but without, and I would never wish in any way to detract from, in what I say in the lessons learned, the huge impact that this has clearly had. I will turn to the lessons learned from the Prevention of Future Deaths report first, if I may, Dame Maria. The report raised three central concerns about the HDC policy that was in place at the time of Collins' release, and I'll take each in turn. Firstly, the coroner, and I pay tribute to His Majesty's Coroner, then Her Majesty's Coroner, for the work that was done on this, highlighted that the prisoner in this case was being held in prison segregation. At the time, he was released on HDC due to his poor conduct in custody and concerns about the risk he could present to others in the prison, highlighted by the Honourable Gentleman in his remarks. The coroner rightly raised concerns about the release in that context, and as a result, we have since taken action to address that issue. The policy framework has been amended to ensure that those in segregation are not released on HDC unless the most senior governor in the prison, the governing governor, has specifically considered those circumstances and determined that the offender can be safely managed in the community. It is now the policy that no one is released on HDC directly from segregation unless the risks have been explicitly considered and a decision actively made at the time of release that HDC remains a safe and appropriate route. Secondly, the report highlighted that the policy at the time required decision makers to consider the risks that the offender might present to those at the proposed curfew address, but not to the public more widely. And quite rightly, changes have been made to address that too. The policy now in place requires that when considering a prisoner for release on HDC, account must be taken of the risks presented overall to people in the community, not just those at the address the offender is going to. And it has been made clear that those wider, more general risks must form part of the process of determining whether an offender is safe to be released on HDC. And thirdly, concerns were raised that the HDC policy contained insufficient guidance on the need to properly share information between the various agencies and professionals involved in managing releases. I fully agree that such information sharing is absolutely vital to ensuring that any risks or concerns about a potential release are picked up and acted on. And therefore, again, the policy framework has been strengthened to draw out the requirement to draw on information from all relevant HMPPS departments and external agencies, including the police and social services, when making such HDC decisions. It has again been made clear prisoners are not to be released on HDC where any important risk management information is missing. The failings, and let's call them what they are, and tragic circumstances of this case underline the importance of prisons, probation and the wider system working together to ensure the safe release of prisoners on HDC while maintaining public protection. Now, the Honourable Gentleman entirely understandably asks about the officers at HMP Ramsey involved in this case and the decision to release Collins on HDC. A thorough internal HMPPS investigation was conducted by senior managers into the release of Collins and the decisions leading up to his release on HDC, as the Honourable Gentleman has highlighted. That investigation concluded that Collins should not have been released on HDC from HMP Ramsey in April 2019, as the decision to release was not in line with HMPPS policy. And I've already highlighted that not all relevant information about risk had been obtained to inform that decision. The investigation also found that as Collins had been subject to adjudication proceedings, the HDC process should have been paused to allow those proceedings to take place. It also made a number of recommendations about policy and practice which have been taken forward, in addition to the changes I've described to the national policy framework to strengthen the approach to assessments, information sharing and decision making on HDC. Now, in the light of the investigation, HMPPS did decide that there were sufficient grounds to bring disciplinary proceedings against staff at the prison. As part of any internal disciplinary process, if the investigator finds any evidence that a criminal offence could have been committed, then the matter is referred to the police to investigate. There was no evidence of criminal conduct found by the three members of staff at HMP Ramsey, so the matter was not handed to the police. The Honourable Gentleman mentions the police in this context. I'm conscious he'll be aware that the police obviously operate independently of the government and indeed the Home Office, their sponsoring department, for want of a better way of putting it, and make their own decisions. But I'm sure that his points will, A, have been heard in that context, but also, I suspect, knowing the Honourable Gentleman as I do, he will have communicated those points directly to Nottinghamshire Police as well on behalf of his constituents. And therefore, he is right to highlight the fact that absent criminal proceedings or a public trial, there is and has been no public process around this. Concluding that there was no evidence of criminal conduct, HMPPS then took action under its own disciplinary proceedings. Now, this, the Honourable Gentleman, I appreciate the points he makes and I understand why he makes them. And pain me though it does, I am legally unable to disclose the details of those disciplinary proceedings. As to do so, I am advised would be acting in breach of the law. I totally appreciate and understand the point that he makes, having prior to getting this portfolio in November of last year, I served for a number of years in different times as the Victims Minister, so I entirely appreciate the importance of closure and of people being able, even just in a tiny way, to be able to move on a little. So I do entirely appreciate the point that the Honourable Gentleman makes. That said, I am sure that the process and decisions in this case have been looked to very carefully by senior officials in HMPPS, and following his tabling of this debate, as well as the research I have done and the information I've asked to be provided with for this debate, it is an issue I intend to return to with my officials, and I will continue to look into the points that he's raised today. With that in mind, I would, if it is helpful to him, I would offer to the Honourable Gentleman, if he would like, to meet with relevant senior HMPPS officials and me, if he wishes, to discuss that disciplinary process, how it works, and the legal implications of it, where I suspect he will quite rightly and understandably put his points courteously but firmly. If that is helpful to him, if he indicates that to me, I'm very, very happy to have that conversation with him and for officials to have that conversation with him. I appreciate it will not go anywhere near as far as he might wish today, but it may nonetheless be of some help. So I leave that offer with him if he wishes to. Of course, I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I'm not for giving way. I completely understand that you cannot, you'll be breaking the law to actually tell us today what sort of disciplinary measures were taken on the three governors. But can you confirm, Minister, whether or not these three governors are still working within the prison service?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. I'm afraid, as I've said, I'm unable to give any details on the nature of that disciplinary process on the floor of this chamber, but I hope, and I hear everything he does say, I hope he may take up the offer of a conversation. That, of course, is his choice, and I'll respect whatever decision the Honourable Gentleman makes on that. We do take our responsibility to keep the public safe very seriously, and where there have been lessons to learn from horrific and tragic cases like this one, where the most horrendous outcome has occurred, we have taken decisive action to address and respond to those issues that have been raised. I'm incredibly grateful for the contributions to this debate, and indeed the tone of it, and for the approach adopted by the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Ashfield. I repeat my heartfelt condolences to Terry's family and friends who suffered so terribly, and reiterate my gratitude to the Honourable Member for securing this debate to allow us to debate and cast a light on hugely important issues of great concern, both to those in this room today, but also, I suspect, more widely. And I hope he will consider the offer of a conversation that I've made to him. Dame Maria, thank you.
Lee Anderson to wind up.
Thank you, Dame Maria. Obviously, the family's going to be very disappointed. I know that, with the outcome of this debate. And although I was encouraged by some of the things the Minister said about strengthening the framework, which is good news, but when you have governors who can't carry out the most basic of tasks, I think anybody in this room today would know that Mr. Collins should not have been released on that day. Anybody. So it's all well and good strengthening frameworks, but when you have incompetence at the highest level, you know, supposed to be carrying out this framework, it's not going to work. Because, like I said, Dame Maria, that anybody reading Collins's report who was part of that prison system at that time would have said he wasn't fit for release. It appears to me that they just wanted to get rid of him and get him out there because he was a nuisance in the system. And the consequence of that is them people there sat there without the dad, without a family member. So all well and good strengthening frameworks, but if you've got incompetent people at the very top in the prison system, then it's pointless. Thank you, Dame Maria.
I join others today in sending deepest sympathies to the family members of Terry who are with us today. And the question is that this House has considered lessons learnt from the Terance Radford Prevention of Future Deaths report. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order, and the sitting now stands adjourned. Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.